Dr. Joe Mastromatteo is a longtime Lake Orion dentist who also has an office in Birmingham. Among other things, he was the junior vice commander of VFW Post 334. He is also their hospital chairman. He spearheaded the movement for the Veterans Memorial in Lake Orion 22 years ago. And among other things, his office the Veterans Memorial has provided a setting for many meaningful events ever since. Dr. Joe was Lake Orion Citizen of the Year in 2007. He even led the holiday parade back then. And we are indeed pleased that you are joining us for a second episode on My Life, Doctor. Thank you. We were talking about your experiences in high school in Mount Clemens. And about some of the things that were going on in Mount Clemens back at that time, the Mineral Springs hotels and Selfridge Air Base back when it was a regular Air Force base. What was going through your mind back then in high school about what you were going to do with the rest of your life?
I don't recall my classmates and myself planning that far ahead. Remember, we're in the early 50s, and college wasn't talked about that much. And I'm talking as I'm entering into high school, 9th and 10th grade. It seemed like it was the challenge before us at that time was all-encompassing, and there was no talk about college preparatory courses. Nothing like that.
Really?
If there were, it would have been something that very few of us heard.
Well, you told me before you were taught by the IHM sisters.
That's true.
There were no encouraging words from them about you really should think about going to college, or?
I think there was probably by the time I got to the junior, senior year, there was a little bit, but not a whole lot. If I recall, I think just a handful out of my graduating class of about 70, only 10 or less than 10 went to college. Maybe more, but I never counted them, but it wasn't half.
Yeah. Okay, now your parents were from Italy. They had to work very hard to get to where they were.
Absolutely.
Eventually were successful with the grocery store.
That's correct, they were.
What were you hearing from them about what to do after you graduated?
My father thought if we had a good high school education, he could turn the store over to the children, and that would be a way of their needs for future life.
Now, you had an older sister, right?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Did she get involved in the grocery store?
Oh, yeah, she had to work too. Yeah, the whole family, all of us were in there.
Did she?
Stock to put up, clean up, and get ready the next day.
Did she come back to the store after graduation, or?
No. She, by the way, okay, you asked a good question. That was my father's intention. My mother's intention, Mom was real good on education. She wanted her kids to have an education. And sister went to Michigan State. She was the oldest one, and went to Michigan State.
What did she end up doing?
She didn't declare a major. She just lasted 1 year. And after that, she dropped out.
Well, but she gave it a try.
She dropped out because the General Motors was really picking up steam in the 50s. They were just knocking them dead. And all of a sudden, a job appeared, and she latched onto that, where she worked for 35 years and retired in the 80s.
Now, you graduated from high school in what year?
52.
Okay, so the Korean War?
Korean War was just coming to an end. Eisenhower was going in the White House, and he said he would bring that to an end. Well, it really wasn't an end. It was gosh, what is it? It wasn't peace.
I know what you mean.
It was a stalemate, which it is to this day.
Exactly, it's been that way.
Horrible, just horrible.
Yeah. So what was going through your mind as you approached graduation day about what you wanted to do?
Not too much, really, because Dad was more concerned with me working in the store. And, I ended up getting a job outside the store, which he okayed me, working for a beer company, delivering beer. And I was putting beer in, I'll never forget, into this bar in Mount Clemens, and this ex-coach from the semi-pro football team ran into me and he said, "Are you going to college?" And I said, "No, why?" He says, "Well, I saw you play football. I think you're good enough to try out at Michigan State. Do you want to do that?" I said, "Of course. How do I do it?" He says, "I'll take care of everything. I'll get somebody to take you up there, introduce you to the coaches, and you can, and hope something good happens
And
for you."
who was this again
This was an alumnus of the high school.
that you went to?
That he was about 10 years older than I was. And it was just a wonderful thing how this happened.
Tell me the experience
The experience of
going to MSU, meeting the right people at the right time.
Well, he was the coach of a semi-professional team in Mount Clemens. And the Selfridge Field soldiers were involved in that. Football was so big at that time as it is right now. But, he knew the coaches up at State, which would be Biggie Munn, Duffy Doherty, Danny Devine, all those big names that later on blossomed big time. And so anyhow, here I am, just 2 years of experience, and all of a sudden I was thrust in the midst of all of these coaches. Michigan State was just beginning to rise in national prominence.
So football was your entrance.
That's correct.
To Michigan State.
That's correct.
And you met all these guys that you just named.
Oh, yeah.
Duffy Doherty,
Oh.
etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Danny Devine was my freshman football coach.
Okay.
Who later on went on to Notre Dame, won the national championship.
Yeah. Okay, so you know you're in at Michigan State and you're going to play football. But now you got to figure everything else out.
You're
what
right.
classes am I going to... Tell me about that.
Well, it just so happened I like mathematics, I like science. And when the enrollment officer asked me, "Well, what are you going to major in?" And I said, "Gee, I had a dental appointment. I kind of like that." I said, "I think I'll be a dentist." That was it.
A very thoughtful process.
Yeah, of course. But it worked. It worked.
And obviously that worked out well for you. Was it harder than you thought it was going to be?
It was a challenge, absolutely. It was a challenge. Well, something happened in football, though. My knee injury came back. I broke my passing finger, and I didn't have quite the amount of experience I needed. I think the raw material was there, but I dropped out as a result.
Okay.
I could see myself sitting on the bench for 3 years because this guy named Earl Morrill was the first quarterback, and he was All-American high school, and he was excellent, as time would prove.
Yeah. We have to take a break right
Sure.
now, but we'll be right back with Dr. Joe Mastromatteo. Don't go away. Back with Dr. Joe Mastromatteo on My Life. We were just talking about your college football experiences, and you mentioned that injuries kind of curtailed the football aspect of your tour at Michigan State. What year would that? Not what numerical year, but was that your second year of college, or when would that have
No,
been?
that was first year, right
Very
from the
first
start.
year.
52.
Okay.
52
So
and spring of 53.
You really didn't end up playing college football for very long.
No, I
did you?
didn't. I have made some wonderful friendships, which I still have to this day, and we enjoy each other very much. And but I could see where I'd be sitting on the bench for 3 years, and so I had to make a decision. All of a sudden, my courses really started to appeal to me, and also the challenge that went with it. And I had to make a decision. It's either football or I go to dental school. So I made the decision, I'm going to drop football.
How did you like college?
Earl Morrill was very well known at that time, and you probably remember him too.
He kind of made you scratch your head a little bit in that situation.
Yeah. The NFL later on, the Hall of Fame and all of that before he passed on.
How did you like Michigan State?
I loved it. I thought it was the most beautiful campus in the world of the few that I saw. And I still think that to this day. With the beautiful Red Cedar River going through the middle of it. My grandchildren are up there now.
Are they?
Students, yes. Yeah.
Was it a little different than being schooled by the IHMs?
Oh, college was much different. There was you could do anything you want. You could study hard, you could flunk out, you could do anything.
Was that a little scary?
It was when you found out that hey, they don't care if you want an education, here it is, but you got to work for it.
When did you meet your wife in all this?
I met her in dental school.
Did you?
Years later.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So your parents must have been very proud of you.
Oh gosh,
going
yes.
through Michigan State.
Well, my father wasn't. Dad said, "Why do you want to go to school? You already got 12 years. I only had 3 years in Italy. Well, you got 12 years. Why don't you run the store?"
Yeah. Besides, I want Sunday off.
Whatever it was, and then after a couple of years, he said, "I think you're right." And so, as a result, they put me through not only college, but 4 years at Georgetown.
Wow. Was it easy to keep focused? Well, let me ask you this a different way. Were you focused on dentistry right from the start?
I would have to say the little introduction I got really worked. I got in with other pre-dental students. We all had our classes together, our chemistry, our physics, our mathematics, and we got to know each other, and we got to realize that, hey, we really got to crack the books here to get in, because they're going to be very picky about who they let into the dental schools, which is true.
Your first 4 years is kind of a more general, like pre-medical sort of thing, isn't it?
It is. It's almost the same thing.
So you could kind of go in
pre-med, pre-dent. It's almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have much support from any local dentists whom you knew once they found out what you?
Not really. Not really. I didn't. I had very few dental appointments at that time, and I did get to know one dentist before going in, but it was cold turkey.
Okay, so you you get your bachelor's degree from Michigan State.
Right.
What's your next step?
Well, I applied to about half a dozen dental schools, and I was accepted at a few of them, and one wanted a personal interview. That was Georgetown. And so I had already made plans to go to Loyola in Chicago. They had accepted me, and but this place called Georgetown.
What was there about?
I never knew. Somebody knew of it, and they told me, "Oh, that's a great school." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, where is it?" They said, "You want to know about it? You don't know where it is."
Well, did Michigan State have a dental school at that time?
No.
They didn't. Okay, so you had to go somewhere else.
Yeah, they had two dental schools in Michigan, Ann Arbor and University of Detroit.
Ah.
And but I wanted to kind of get out of state. So anyhow, Georgetown said they wanted a personal interview. I flew there, I'll never forget, and of course I'm flying over the Potomac River, seeing the Capitol and the Washington Monument, and I said, boy, that's interesting. Wow, this is fascinating. This is the world, the capital, our nation, and
kind of a different world.
Yeah. Well, I get up to the school, and the dean is interviewing me, And I'm looking out the window at the Washington Monument, the Potomac River, Arlington, and I'm saying to myself, I could like this. And then when the interview was over, I didn't know how I did, got on the plane, returned home, and we waited. And about a week later, I get this letter saying I'm accepted. So I go to my father, who had already put $500 down to Loyola, and I said, Dad, I think I want to go to Georgetown. He says, why? I said, it's awfully nice. And it's in Washington, D.C. I've never been there before, and it's the capital of our nation. And on and that, he says, but what about the money? I said, I'll make it up to you. He let me go.
So it looked nice. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. You were anxious to get out of town. What was it really like when you finally got there and got moved in and started classes?
Very, very confusing and strange. You know, Georgetown is a mile away from the White House. Mm-hmm. Another big challenge. All of a sudden, you're up against more competition, which is good because it brings out the best in us. And as things would have it, we started introducing each other. Can't remember all the details, but oh my God, everybody was from the East Coast. I was the only one from the Midwest. We had one person from Hawaii and a few from the Pacific Coast, but everybody was New Yorkers or Boston and the East Coast. So it was a new baptism.
Was it harder than you thought?
The first year, we didn't have time to think almost. I remember one month there was 28 examinations, and that was the month that you either made it or you didn't.
I remember in high school on a career day, there was an MD who was one of the reps from town, and he held up a thick, he told us about his first experience in medical school, and that one of the professors held up a thick book and said, by the time you're done, you're going to know all of this. Was that kind of the way it was?
Almost.
Yeah.
Almost.
We have to take a brief break, but we'll
Okay.
be right back. Dr. Joe Mastromatteo, don't go away.
Hi everyone, don't forget you can purchase DVDs of your favorite shows from OCTV, whether it's Minutes by Minute, Our Community Access, or Connie's Kitchen. Just call the station. Our number is 248-628-9658. And enjoy watching all of our shows on OCTV.
Back with Dr. Joe Mastromatteo. So you're in Georgetown going to dental school. The Korean War has wound up. What were your but the draft was what was the story on the draft back? What were you thinking about what you were going to do when you got your degree?
Well, at the end of my junior year, I met my wife, and of course, we were making plans to get married and settle down, start my practice. And I often wondered about the selective service. That's what it was called at the time. I don't know if it's called that today.
It is, yeah.
Still that
I think
today.
so.
Well, anyhow, I hadn't heard from them in over a year or a year and a half. It was a long time.
Because you did have a deferral.
That's correct. All through college and dental school, you had to maintain a minimum C average to be deferred. If you dropped from a C average, Uncle Sam would have you in the Army.
That's something a lot of people don't remember, that back then, even though there wasn't a war going on, they had the draft.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, didn't mean to interrupt. Continue with your story.
No. So anyhow, by time, just before graduation, I hear from Selective Service. And they said, report to San Antonio for the U.S. Army in October 1960. And I was married in the summer of that year, so my wife and I, after we got married, headed for San Antonio.
Oh my goodness.
Where I got my orders, I'd be shipped out to Korea. And So she returned back home to New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire, and lived with her parents while I finished out my tour in Korea, and then I returned home.
Tell me how that works for somebody in the medical field. Do you go through the regular basic training and stuff, or what did
We
they do?
sure did.
Did you?
I want to straighten that out. We went to Camp Bullis, a place near San Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
We had to crawl 100 yards under barbed wire with machine gun bullets going over our head. And the sergeant said, if you don't think they're real, you will. Every 8th round will be a tracer bullet to remind you there are bullets up there. So don't raise your head. And we went through that. That was for 4 days and nights of basic training.
So
Which I'm happy we did it, because there's a feeling that the meds, the pro people, they would call us, pro pay, didn't have to do all that stuff and so forth. That wasn't true.
Well, there was also the thought, in my mind anyway, that they needed you out there as soon as possible because of your skills.
Sure, I'm sure I didn't factor that in.
Yeah, but anyway, so immediately after basic training, you went to Korea.
Yeah.
And what do you remember about your feelings when you first set foot in South Korea?
Let's see, they had us examined when we got off the plane and put us in little huts, Quonset huts. I came down with tremendous stomach problems, whether or not it was the change of of atmosphere or whatever. Man, I thought I was ready to be buried. I was so sick. But 3 days later, I was fine. The doctor said I had a severe case of gastroenteritis, stomach infection, and perhaps, I'm sure, from the food that we had eaten, even though it was military food. Mm-hmm. It was not uncommon. They told us later.
What surprised you about your assignment there? Anything in particular about the surroundings or the people, or?
Well, when I got to Pyeongtaek, which was better known as K6, whatever that meant to the military, we had a dental clinic. We did dentistry on the soldiers, and it was my job to be helicoptered to other places just like that to take care of the Nike Hercules missile site personnel. Mm-hmm. We were putting up missile sites at the time. And I would have to be left off in a helicopter with my instruments and stuff, take care of bring that battery of men, of 150 men, up to good dental health.
So you carried everything with you that you needed to use?
Mostly. Sometimes they had a setup that I didn't have to use my stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now that
Uncle Sam took good care of the troops.
So now that the Korean War conflict had subsided, we were in the height of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
This was around 1960.
Yeah.
So the missiles that you talk about were probably aimed at the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the atmosphere that you were part of.
Not really Soviet Union. Perhaps, I don't know. The intelligence was great. I ate with people in the intelligence department. They would not say a word until 10 years later, after it was all out in the newspaper, when one of my friends visited me who was in the intelligence. And he said, do you remember we told the North Koreans that our missiles were non-nuclear? I said, oh yeah. He says, well, they were nuclear. I said, it doesn't surprise anybody, because if they had nukes, we would have to use them too and blow.
Did you spend the rest of your Army career in Korea?
No, I had to almost, but 6 months before my 2-year term was up, they shipped me back to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I finished out the 6 months there in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. How did you find the countryside of Korea that you were in, the people in Korea at that time? I mean, It was a few years after the conclusion of the conflict. Were things getting back to normal?
Not really, not really. There were still skirmishes of the demilitarized zone, the mile or 2 miles between South and North Korea when I was there. And there was gunfire going on, and they were still arguing at Panmunjom, if you remember, of the attacks on this side and the attacks on that side across this demilitarized zone, and that went on. We had people at that table, by the way, who would their whole tour would be to argue across that table. Can you imagine that? And I think that's still going on to this day.
I think it is too.
Incredible.
Yeah.
But as Churchill said, it's better to jaw than to war.
That's true. That's
so
true.
Keep talking.
Tell us about the transition to civilian life for Dr. Mastromatteo, the dentist.
Well, we came back to Michigan, where we decided to set up shop. And I heard of a little town called Lake Orion, where a dentist, they needed a dentist. And I came out here. The previous dentist, who was there for a long time, had died. And I talked with his widow, and she welcomed me into Lake Orion. And I said, it sounds good to me. My wife liked it.
And the rest, as they say,
and that was November of '62, and the rest is history.
Yep. We have to wrap this up, but very quickly, how many children did you and your wife have?
We have 7.
Anybody a dentist?
No.
What about grandchildren?
No.
Anybody on their way to dental school?
Not yet.
Oh, well, you've got to encourage them.
But you should ask why that was so. And I asked one of my sons, who later became a radiologist.
Well, really?
I said, Jim, why didn't you ever want to be a dentist? I said, you had good hands. You were an artist. You did some nice artwork. You played the piano, you played the guitar. I said, you got good manual dexterity. He said, Dad, I've been watching you, and it looked like it was too hard. I said, so you became a radiologist, where you sit in the room all day long and look at pictures in a dark room.
I like to ask all my guests this. If you had it to do over again, would you do anything differently?
I don't think so. Thank you. I don't think so. I think the good Lord has been very kind to me and helped in so many ways, and for that I'm very grateful. I think I have a lot to be thankful for.
Dr. Joe Mastromatteo, thank you for your service. Thank you for being a citizen of our area and for all the help that you've been to us. We appreciate your being on our program as well. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure, John.
We'll see you next time.
Hello, I'm Elgin Nichols.
And I'm Terry Stiles.
Together, Terry and I host the weekly news Monday through Friday at 12, 6, and 11 p.m.
Broadcast on Charter Channel 191 and AT&T U-verse 99, we only cover news that impacts our local Addison and Oxford area. In other words, by all accounts, news that would normally not receive from any other televised source.
But chances are, if it's local, it will be found on Oxford Community Television and OCTV.
For the weekly news, I'm Terry Stiles.
And I'm Elgin Nichols. Together, we invite you to join Terry and me for our next OCTV weekly news program.